Welcome, everyone. Today we have the wonderful Caitlin Weaver. She's the best-selling author of Such a Good Family and Things We Never Say. In addition, she's a journalist and editor covering topics including health, style, parenting, and business for outlets like Well Plus Good, Business Insider, HuffPost, Scary Mommy, and more. She actually has more books than the ones I mentioned. And by the time this podcast comes out, her latest book, Who We Used to Be, will be out everywhere. I beg you to read her books. They're awesome. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
So I always like to ask the first question, just to get to know you personally, your journey to writing. Everybody has such an interesting story. So can you tell us how you came to writing, whether originally or how you came to taking writing seriously, like I know you have been in the past several years?
Yeah, well, mine, like many writing journeys, is long and convoluted, so I'll try to give you the short version of it. But I've always loved books. I was always a huge reader, and so understood from a very young age just the impact they can have on people. And then when I became a mother for the first time, I have two young kids. Being a parent has a way of sort of, I think, bringing your life into very sharp perspective. And I realized that I had always wanted to write a book and that now was the time. It's you sort of grapple with your own mortality, I think, once you have kids, not to get existential on you. And so I thought, okay, if I want to write, I'm going to do it. And I think also at that time of my life, writing helped me make sense of the identity shifts I was experiencing in becoming a parent. And those smaller pieces of writing turned into essays that I started to publish in various parenting outlets. And as that built, I realized I had a bigger story to tell and set about writing my first novel, Such a Good Family, that you mentioned. And that one took me 3 years. So that was my let's teach myself how to write a novel book. I don't have any formal training. I don't have an MFA. We can certainly talk about, all the resources I have used to learn how to write and just that craft experience. But that was really where I was learning how to do that. And once I finished it, I had no idea whether anyone would ever publish it. I just knew it was important for me to tell the story that was burning inside of me. And once I finished that one, I realized I wanted to keep going, and it's just gone from there.
Oh, so I want to talk about how the motherhood and your parenting kind of like kickstarted your serious approach to this. I assume that you were writing before you were a parent, or the all of the essays, all of the writing started when you became a parent.
A lot of it started there. I mean, I'd always been that girl walking around with her journal, right? In my teen years and very interested in the craft of writing. I have some writers in my family, so it's always something that I've been exposed to. But I think I really started to take it seriously when I did have kids in terms of sharing some of those stories with the world. I did what a lot of people do when I started a blog just about my experience as a mom. And it wasn't one of those things that was widely read, but I sent it out to a lot of friends and family. And the responses I all got from the essays I were writing were, oh my gosh, me too. Why don't people talk about this more? And so I felt like, okay, I maybe do have a voice that people want to hear, and I'm willing to just write in an honest way about things that are hard for us to talk about sometimes. And so eventually, I think that translated into the kind of books that I write, which I think are also about things that are hard to talk about sometimes, but that we deserve to have honest conversations about.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see the connection for sure. I think it's I think it's beautiful that you were inspired by that shift into parenting. It does change your life. I've had personal experiences where people have, because I'm a teacher, I've had personal experiences where people have mentioned that s- chasing that dream of writing and becoming an author and following something that you love like that is just like such a good example to set. And so you're setting this example for your children, which is incredible. Like what a way to like burst onto the scene as a parent to set up this idea that you could chase your dreams and do what you want, the thing that you love, and become successful at it, which you have been incredibly. I want to talk about that success. So you started writing fairly recently. And yet in the past 2 years, I don't know if my math is exactly right. In the past 2 years, you're releasing 4 books. Is that the correct math?
Yeah, that's about right. It picked up very quickly for me, and I'm so grateful for that. But it was a long journey to that first publication. As I mentioned, it took about 3 years to write that book, probably another year to sort of get it in shape to, submit it. And I feel very fortunate to, work with a publisher that is, eager for my books. I think after that first book, I had learned a lot about how to write a book more efficiently, which I think as a parent of young kids, anything that you're doing, you try to squeeze in the margins, which for me is writing. You have to be very efficient. And so I think I've gotten good at drafting very quickly and have been fortunate enough to have the appetite from my publisher. And so, such a good family, actually. The anniversary of the debut was June. So it came out June of 2024.
Okay.
And then in that time, yes, I have had three other books come out. And then I know by the time this podcast actually airs, I'll have a fourth one that releases.
Right. Wow. So quick drafting is right. Are you drafting these books in about like 3 or 4 months? Is that kind of the timeline?
Yeah, 3 or 4 months, and it is a very fast clip. And it's funny. I just had a conversation with my publisher about how, okay, I think I might need to take a beat and slow down a little bit. But I think for me, I was very realistic going into this that if I am trying to make this shift into writing as something that is my full-time job. And, I love to write and I want to tell stories, but at the end of the day, I also do want to be commercially successful. I'm not afraid to say that. I think sometimes that's something authors don't talk about, but that is important to me. I want my books to be read. Um, and I know I'm very aware of the fact that it is important to have a backlist as an author because every new book that comes out, you have new people who discover it. And then I do this certainly. I get so excited when I find out that an author who's new to me has, three, four, five, six other books that I haven't read. And of course, I go back and I buy all of those. And so I think for me, I recognize that I wanted to gain some momentum quickly by trying to put out 3 or 4 books very quickly to generate a backlist that readers who are discovering me for the first time could go back to. So that was, strategic. I also felt fortunate that I had those stories that were burning to be told and sort of felt very fully formed when I got the idea. So they were easy to put pen to paper on.
Okay. I want to talk about the strategy of releasing multiple books. So first of all, it's genius. I have heard personally that discoverability doesn't really pick up for an author until a third book.
Yes, I have heard
So
that too. Sometimes
yes,
as much as five.
yeah. So some people put out a book and then it doesn't do well. And we're talking inside baseball here. This podcast is meant to be for all people that love reading, but also for writers. And I do want to pull back the curtains on some of this stuff. So people put out a book and then it doesn't do well, and then they think, oh, well, that's that. I guess I couldn't make it, or I guess this isn't for me.
Uh-huh.
Or they get hugely discouraged and they put out a second book and the same thing. But the reality is, they say like there's something magical in that third book coming out. And then people, as you said, because there's a backlist, it's like people go, oh, this person's like an established writer. You kind of
Yeah.
give that, you have this foundation that people can like really draw from. And then they can see like what is your actual style. If they read these books, they can kind of get a real sense of your voice and style as a writer, and then fall in love with you, which is what you're going for sure. And but what I know for sure is that in the indie world, in the indie author world, that's a huge driving force. And yet you're not an indie author, and
Yeah.
so you
Sort of
kind
in
of have this, yeah, you kind of have this like indie, like punk ethos of like, I'm gonna take the reins on this. I'm gonna make sure that I can establish myself. I'm gonna make sure people can find me, which is like kind of like I am the driver of my career mentality. But you're traditionally published, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. I'm traditionally published with a smaller, newer press that I'm a huge fan of. They're called Storm Publishing. And they are much more sort of digital first in a lot of their publications and very data-based. And so, unlike some larger traditional presses, in terms of what I've heard from friends who are published with them, my publisher is very transparent with, sales numbers on a very regular basis. They're very open to my feedback on everything from, cover design to marketing strategy to who I want to position myself alongside of. But I had to take the initiative to be confident about what I wanted for my books, which has really grown over time as I have published multiple books. And I think that has really worked to my advantage to have such a collaborative relationship with my publisher. And again, I've never worked with a large traditional press, so, I can't speak to exactly how it works. But experiences that I've heard from friends who have is that it is a very different experience in terms of the support that you get in terms of marketing and sort of where you may fall in the pecking order. So again, that's not my experience, so I don't want to speak to it, but I've had a very good experience having a collaborative relationship where I'm giving a lot of input with my publisher, who's a smaller press.
Yeah, I want to return to the idea of publishing in a little bit, but I do believe that you seem to have struck this like perfect mixture of the different publishing paths you can have. You seem to have this blend going on, which is incredible. I want to return to that idea in a second.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I want to, before we get into the publishing, because I have some like specific questions to ask about that. I want
Uh-huh.
to ask you about this. I'm still on this 4 books in 2 years thing because I am so impressed by this. I love it. I'm a slower writer. I'm lucky if I can draft. It takes me about a year to do a first draft of a book, and
Uh-huh.
then another year to kind of like get it in shape. So I'm curious about that, about your process, but specifically in writing 4 books. So, well, or maybe we won't include that first one because that took 3 years. But if we include the following three, you
Yeah,
definitely wrote those in a 2 year span, correct? So
that's
if we
right.
take those 3 books in 2 years, my question is, and you maybe spoke to this a little bit about your confidence level. How has your writing process or your writing changed? Because that has to have evolved pretty quickly in that time period. You probably get to know yourself pretty well as a writer in writing 3 books within 2 years. So, what's changed? Has something in your process changed? Has something in what you've discovered in your voice changed? Like, what, has any, like, tell me about that transformation. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think all of those things. I think, as I mentioned, I was really learning how to write a novel with that first one, what works, what doesn't, structure, characterization, how much backstory is too much backstory, sort of learning all of those things. And I think, even in starting the second one, I had a much better handle on that because by that point, when I started the second one, I still didn't have a deal for the first one. I just knew I was
Mm,
ready to start a second one. Um, but I had been, always working with beta readers who, if you're not a writer, that's someone that you swap manuscripts with sort of early on. So early readers, I have a critique group of other writers that I've worked with for, gosh, years at this point, where we're, meeting every couple of weeks and trading chapters and giving each other feedback. And so I think having those structures in place as I was going into writing my second book, which I didn't have all of this for my first book because I was sort of entering the writing space. I didn't have a community. But I worked hard to build relationships with other writers whose work I love to read and who are eager to read my work early and give each other feedback. And so I have a good sense as I'm writing what's working and what's not. And I can course correct, I think, earlier because my writing group, for example, they're reading my chapters as I'm writing them. So
yeah.
as I'm going in the manuscript. And I've certainly made, large shifts in a plot or in a character arc based on their feedback. And so by the time my book gets to my editor now, I didn't have an editor to work with on the first one. It is usually in pretty good shape because I've had a lot of feedback along the way, which I think is really critical. And I think the other thing that really shifted for me was beginning to treat writing more like a job. Um, I wrote my first book while I had a full-time corporate job, and so I was writing from 5 to 7 in the morning, and that was sort of what I could do. And I have sort of restructured my life around writing now, which is a privilege for sure. Not everyone is able to do that. And it's not that I'm making all of this money from my books. I'm making some money, but I have now a writing freelance business. So I do a lot of, I feel like I have 15 different jobs, but my whole
Mhm.
world is writing now in terms of how I'm supporting myself. And so I am able to say, you know what, like, I'm not going to worry about these other things in life right now. This is my job. I'm sitting down at the computer from 9 to 3 or however long it takes, and I'm working on these different projects today. And so having that mindset where, I need to be in my chair working on this rather than it feeling like something I'm trying to fit in on top of other things has really shifted things for me as well, and just treating it like a job, which it now is for me.
I think that's incredible. And congratulations, by the way. That is such a special shift in your life and such a special accomplishment to be having your career focused solely on the writing. I can't imagine how fulfilling that must feel for you. And I think there that seems to me really a really smart tactic. Going back to what you said about the using critique groups and to go through your manuscript along the way. Um, I know a lot of writers, and I can include myself on this. I currently just write in isolation and then share the book when it's done.
Mhm.
And there's something to that too. Everybody
Yeah,
has their
and
own.
everybody's process is
Hmm.
different. I want to say that this is not that I've figured out some magic secret sauce that is this is how you write a book. I have just figured out what works for me, and I think that is the most important thing, is to figure out what works for you in terms of how you draft. And maybe it does take a year for you to draft a manuscript, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just figuring out, how you do it best.
But I do like what you're saying about the about going through chapters at a time. You can course correct along the way. That sounds to me to be a very efficient and helpful way to go through the drafting process because you have a
Yeah.
little bit of support along the way as well, rather than this writing, locking yourself in a room for a long period of time and just not showing anybody and waiting till the end for people to go, none of this works or whatever, you
Yeah.
know? So you have that along the way, which is really cool. I think that's a
Well, and I
really
will
smart
say
strategy.
too, not to interrupt you, the other thing that's really changed for me is just letting go of things being perfect before
Hmm.
I show them to anyone. Because I think I felt, especially writing that first book, that it really needed to be perfect before I could show it to anyone, which of course it wasn't. I mean, I rewrote it like 12 times because I didn't know what I was doing.
Hmm.
But I think now, having people around me who I trust enough to show my imperfections to, but knowing that I just need to get it down on the page so I can talk through it with some people. And it's not going to be pretty the first time around, and that's fine.
Oh yeah, such wise words. Find a trusted group and allow allow yourself to hand it over for sure. And I'm sure that every time you do that, you get a little more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Um, that's amazing. I do want to go back to the publishing now. So
Mm.
you found Storm. Is it called Storm Publishing?
Storm Publishing.
You found Storm Publishing. It's a small press, and I want to talk about small presses because small presses are not the big five, and they're
Hmm.
not indie press. They're their
That's right.
own category,
Yeah.
and I want listeners of the podcast to learn more about it because I just think it's a very valuable path to take, especially with what you already revealed, which is that there seems to be almost like this blending going on of taking the best of traditional publishing in that you don't have to pay and that you don't have to do all of the design and marketing blah blah blah, like they're helping you, but also taking the best of the indie world, which is giving you a lot of control still in the process. And so I want to talk about how did you, I'm not sure if you have an interesting story for how you found Storm Publishing, but I am curious of how you like knew it was time to submit to them and what that process was like, because this process of submitting to an agent is perhaps different than the process of submitting to a small press. So once you found them, what were the next steps from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So To answer the first part of your question, I think I knew it was time when I knew there was nothing else I could do on my own to make the
Mm.
manuscript better. Like I had edited it several times. I had taken a turn with a great developmental editor, um, gone through a couple of, structured writing program, mentorship programs. So I felt like I had done everything I could do on my own without a publishing professional, to say, yes, this is what we think will work. And so that was that was how I knew it was time. I was so sick of the manuscript, and I knew there was nothing else I could do on my own. And I did query agents for a long time, and I had so many near misses. I knew I was onto something with the book because I think I queried like 50 to 70 agents, and I had an enormous amount of full and partial requests,
Mm.
several revise and resubmits, which, if you're new to publishing lingo, that means an agent really likes your book. They would like to see some changes. And so they give you that feedback, ask you to make the changes just to sort of see how you do in terms of that.
Oh, it's huge.
Um,
Yeah.
so I say I came so close, but there were just a couple of things about the book and it was the same feedback across the board that they just weren't sure how they were going to make it work. For example, the book has 6 points of view, which I do not recommend for a first novel at all. But again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so that's the way I wrote it. And then that's the way it needed to be, I think, ultimately. But it was hard for a lot of agents to see how that was going to work because
Mm.
that's not something you generally see in books, especially in debut novels. And I had a friend of mine who had had a very good experience with another small press that was started by the same person who's now the CEO of Storm Publishing. And she was the
Mm.
one who said, why don't you just take a break from the agent world and just explore this and see how it might work? And Storm responded right away. And the editor that I currently work with loved the book. She, I think, understood what I was trying to do with those 6 points of view, and she was willing to put in the work with me to smooth that out and structurally make it happen so that it was palatable for the reader. And I've been very happy working with them.
I think this is interesting. You found Storm Publishing through a recommendation, but ultimately you found someone there, the editor, that fell in love with your book, which is the
Yes,
same thing that happens on the agent end, right? You're just
absolutely.
hoping that you find someone that falls so in love with it like you are, and they think like I'm willing to fight for this thing. I'm willing to figure out how to get this thing out into the world. And you just found that on the editing end, which is incredible. But also, I think what's important that you mentioned is, and I don't want to, I certainly don't want to not comment on this. Before you even went to the agenting, before you went to the small press, you had gone over this book again and again and again with
So many
other
times.
people, with people that uh, possibly knew more than you on the marketing perspective side of things or on the commercial book world side of things, but also just other people outside of yourself who have their own opinions about what the book needs and what the book's failings are. That part of the process cannot be skipped. It cannot be rushed. It has to happen. And congratulations on you getting that much like feedback even in the agenting pool, because that's rare to have that many people
Yeah, and
chomping at the bit.
that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's incredible. But it does seem to me like you struck gold with Storm Publishing with this small press route, because it does give you that aspect of the indie world where you have more say and more control perhaps than you would at a big five, and allows you to kind of maybe take more chances or do more things or write what you want to write. So I think, and you also still found an editor that loves your work. So I think, to me, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you won the lottery. I think this is a perfect setup for you.
Yeah, I do feel very grateful. And again, I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know how things may have been different if I had gone, with a traditional big five and had that opportunity. And, it's not to say that I wouldn't do that in the future. Um, but this has been a really positive experience for me. And the other thing I think that is important to stress is in terms of, the creative input that I offer, that happens because I give that input. I think And again, this has been a learning curve for me as well. And I'm fortunate to have a publisher and an editor that's very open to this. But I think as authors, it behooves us to take that control. I think it's often easy to feel, and I felt this for a long time, that, oh, okay, I did the work, I wrote the book, someone else is going to figure out how to sell it now.
Mm,
That's not really how publishing works anymore. Yes, if you are with a publisher, there will be some support and they will have some ideas and there will be a marketing plan. But a lot of it is also on you to have ideas for how to align and coordinate with your publisher's plan, to have a network of, early readers and build your readership any way that works for you, whether that's social media platform, newsletter, in-person events, to sort of find the things that work for you and your personality and really go after those. um, I think often as authors we don't do that. We sort of think that it's going to be up to someone else to do all of the marketing, but it is a lot of what I do in addition to the writing, is thinking about how to grow that readership and really connect with people so that they will want to come back and read my next book.
yeah, and the proof is right in front of all of our eyes, guys. If you don't yet know Caitlin or follow Caitlin on Instagram, you have to. She's
Thank you.
constantly making these fun little videos about writing, about the writing life, about her books. And so she's really putting her money where her mouth is. Caitlin knows how to market, and she's done a great job at kind of inviting the reader in to her journey, which is something that's not easy to do. So
Thank you very much.
congratulations on that. I want to talk a little bit. I want to lean in a little bit to what you just said about the input and the publishing. So you wrote a Substack, and I think you had a couple of Instagram posts about titles and covers, and how that interesting dynamic of working with a publisher on the titles and covers. And there's a little bit of give and take. I think a lot of probably of the listeners of this podcast will know that you often in the traditional landscape do not get to name your book, or at least like you get to put your name in as a possibility, and then several other possibilities are created, and then whatever happens goes from there. And cover design is a different thing. Could you tell us a little bit about the titles, or the covers, or how that, like your take on that, or your what you've liked about it or haven't liked about that process? I'm just curious because it is so interesting to me.
Yeah, sure. It was very eye-opening for me as well. I mean, I did not know that most authors don't title their own books, that, publishers often do that. And that was the case for me with my first book. I had a title that I was so in love with and I was sure was the perfect title. And my publisher was like, no, we're not sure about that, which shocked me. And then ultimately they came up with a title that I think was so much better. So this is my first book, Such a Good Family, and I love that title. And it was not the title of the book as I wrote it. Um, and so that one changed. My next book, Things We Never Say, that is actually the title that I came up with. So that was one where we aligned. But it is an interesting process. Like right now, I am in edits on another book that's going to be coming out next winter. And my editor and I are kind of exchanging daily emails every time we think of a potential title. So, I sent her a few, she sends me a few. And I think the goal with a title is, you want it to feel genre aligned and reflective of the book, but also something that's going to grab the audience. And so it's hard. I mean, some people are very good at titles. I personally am not. It's often the last thing that comes to me, as I'm sending my editor my first draft. I have to slap a title on it because, the whole time I've been writing the book, it just hasn't come to me. But it is an interesting back and forth. And so with me, it's obviously just sort of exchanging ideas with my editor. And similarly with the covers, I mean, my publisher takes the lead on cover design, especially as I've gotten to my more recent books. I'm not shy about saying, I don't think that's right for the direction we want to go, or being proactive. So my new book that's coming out, Who We Used to Be, I did all the research on who I thought this book should sit beside in a bookstore, which authors and what their covers looked like, and sent ideas. And so all of that gets factored into a design brief. And ultimately, they came up with something that I love, but it didn't start there. And so I think it is, as an author, being very aware of who your comps are, what those covers look like, how your cover would look sort of sitting alongside those, and whether readers would associate it with the right kind of genre. But it's a really interesting artistic process. And I am not artistic in that way. I'm so glad I don't have to design my own covers, but I do love having input and having sort of a vision for what I want the feel of those to be.
Yeah, and I feel this really aligns with a couple of things you said. First, about uh, being not afraid to let go of things. Like, so within the pages themselves, as you're writing and you're getting feedback, you have to not be married to the chapter or the characters or the things, and not being afraid to let go of those things. Same thing goes with your dreams of the title, right? This process has a lot of people involved, and it necessarily so. And so you can hope for a title, but it might not happen, and that's okay. That's all part of it. But the other thing this brings up is something else you said about how you have to kind of assert yourself. You can't just expect someone to send you an email going, all right, Caitlin, now we would like to hear what you have to say. You have to kind of put yourself out there and go, I know what I'm talking about. Here are the comps. Here are some covers. Here's how they sold. And when you speak with that kind of level of authority, then they have no choice but to listen, right? Because you're making sense, right? They can't ignore that at that point. I love how you're asserting yourself in there and kind of making yourself a big part of the process. And I think that's great advice to all writers out there, whether they're at the big five or a small press, to really research the industry as best you can and kind of give some choices, but make sure they're informed, and then maybe they'll involve you more in the process, even at the big five. I'm not. I'm just hypothesizing here, but it seems like a smart approach at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worked for me. And again, it's been a learning curve. I certainly, didn't feel as confident making those recommendations in, my first couple of books. But I think I have come to see that this is now my job. And just like any other job, I had a long corporate career before I became a writer. It behooves me to be proactive and to know what I'm talking about in terms of my own personal brand.
Absolutely. I have one more question before we get to the fast round,
Yeah.
and because I want to give you a chance to speak about who we used to be, which will be out by the time this podcast releases. So if you could tell us, like, maybe like where the inspiration came from for who we used to be, or um, tell us a little bit about what you're going for with it. Just want to give you a chance to talk about your book for the listeners.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited about this book. If you've read any of my books, you'll sort of see that the constant themes of female friendship, with all its complications and ups and downs, as well as complicated family dynamics. I write a lot about one unexpected event that throws everything into turmoil, and sort of all the what if moments that come with that, in terms of hard decisions that you need to make, in terms of parenting, relationships, friendships, all of those things. And so Who We Used to Be really brings all of that together. It is the story of a woman, Dana Blair, whose teenage daughter ends up in a coma after being treated in the ER by Dana's best friend, who's an ER doctor. And then the fallout from what happens there. Whose fault was it really? And what that means for their friendship. And it's been so much fun to, I think one thing I love to do with my books is to make readers sort of think, oh my gosh, what would I do in that situation? Because I often put my characters into impossible situations, right? Like to choose between your daughter and your best friend, things like that. And so Who We Used to Be really brings all of those complicated themes together. It also takes me back to one of my first loves, which is writing in multiple perspectives. So I mentioned my debut novel, Such a Good Family, had 6 narrators, which is far too many. I mean, I think it worked for that book, but I'm certainly not attempting that again. But Who We Used to Be is told from multiple perspectives. There's a couple of adults who are narrators. There's also a couple of teenagers, so you start to kind of see different sides of the story. And so that was a lot of fun, writing about complicated female friendships, writing about family dynamics, and writing in multiple perspectives are all things I love to do. And I think it worked really well in this book, and I hope people love it.
I love those things as well, Caitlin. I think I'm gonna love this book. I'm getting major The Pit vibes from this one. Um, and yeah, I love those things equally. So I know I'm gonna love it. I can't wait to read it. And I, like I said, I beg all of you out there to pick up Caitlin's books. They're wonderful. The premises are fun, and the if you love those family dynamics, like she's saying, and the female friendships, you'll love it. I'm also getting like Big Little Lies, like that kind of world. If you like those kind of things, I strongly suggest you pick up Caitlin's stuff. Okay, Caitlin, we made it to the fast round.
Okay, I'm excited.
This is just like 5 or 6 questions, and you can just answer quickly. It's called the fast round. You could explain. There's no pressure here, but they're meant to be like rather brief, basic questions. So the first question is the old classic: Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm very much a plotter. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of character maps.
And do you do an outline as well?
I do,
Oh
yes.
wow.
And it doesn't mean that I always stick to the outline, but I
Mm,
like to know where I'm going generally. And again, as I mentioned, that has changed based on feedback from my critique partners sometimes. But it's very important to me to know what the story is and where it's going before I start. And I think that's part of what helps me draft quickly,
mm.
is to be able to sort of reference, okay, what am I working on today? What's the momentum that we're going for?
Makes total sense. Okay, next one. What's one writing rule or one piece of writing advice you don't really agree with?
I'm not a big fan of the whole write what you know
Hmm.
thing. I do write a lot of scenarios that I have lived through, but as I mentioned, a couple of my narrators in this next book are teenagers. One's a teenage boy. I don't know anything about being a teenage boy. But I think writing what we don't know is often a way to just educate ourselves about different points of view and different experiences, and I think that's important.
I love it. Couldn't agree more. The next one's pretty wide open, and you can draw from anything for this. Who inspires you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many writers that I've been inspired by over the years. I'm a huge Anne Patchett fan. I'm a huge Leanne Moriarty fan. You mentioned Big Little Lies. I love that book. I mean, I think she does such an excellent job of writing about really important things in a highly bingeable way, which is something
Hmm.
I think I try to do in my books. I'm also really inspired by my parents. I grew up as the child of two English professors. My dad is a writer as well. And so I think just being raised in a house full of books where people always wanted to talk about books has had a huge impact on me. And I'm really grateful for all of their support.
Oh, it's amazing. I also love Anne Patchett too. She's the best.
The queen, the queen.
Yes, yes. Next question. If you could offer one piece of advice to aspiring writers, what would it be?
Just write. I think often we trick ourselves into thinking that conditions need to be ideal, right? You have your beautiful office, you have uninterrupted time, hot coffee. That's never going to happen. I mean, I think I wrote most of my first book in, 15 to 20-minute increments. And so just teaching yourself to write wherever you are, whenever you can. It's the only way. 15 minutes adds up, and pretty soon you have a book.
Great advice. And here's the final question in the fast round. This is my personal favorite. Name a book that changed your life. And yeah, this could be something from childhood or something you read last night. No pressure.
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's so many tough ones, and I think about it more in terms of my adult life and my journey to being a writer, and there are two that come to mind. One is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and the other is Frederick Bachman's Beartown. I mean, he's got a whole series, but the first one, Beartown, and I think both of those books really made me want this. Like it really made me want to write a book about something important that was also highly readable because I put those books sort of in the category of Big Little Lies, where I think they're writing about incredibly important contemporary issues, but in a way where you can't put it down. So it doesn't feel like a lecture or, and they do such a good job of writing in the gray, and sort of writing multiple truths, which is the world that we live in. And so I think those books made me really think about the possibility of doing that on the page and really wanting to do that for myself.
I love those, both of those authors, both of those books. Great picks, and
Yeah.
I can see those threads running through your work. So, for sure, I think you're hitting it. All right, Caitlin. Before we go, I just want to give you a chance to talk about anything that you want to talk about with your own work, or pitch something that you're working on, or just tell readers where they could find you, or anything like that.
Yeah, no, this has been such a lovely conversation. I appreciate the opportunity. You can find me on Instagram at Caitlin R. Weaver. I'm in the same place at Substack, Caitlin R. Weaver. Um, and my new book, as you mentioned, will be out by the time this podcast airs, Who We Used to Be. So I hope you'll check it out. Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about it.
Awesome. So you heard it here, guys. Follow Caitlin on Instagram, read her Substack, read her books. They're incredible. Thank you for coming here and talking today, Caitlin. It was such an awesome experience.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thanks for watching The Right Thing. If you're interested in learning more about what we talked about in today's podcast, you can head over to Substack to check out my newsletter at jasonearhart.substack.com for an even deeper look into the writer's journey. Also, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you can check out all the things we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. We'll be back next time with another interview, offering more insights to take your craft to the next level. Until then, just keep writing.